the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In this week's episode, I'm excited to be joined by Andrea Medina, all the way from Mississippi. Andrea and I chat about trauma, recovery, and the concept of interconnected healing. I love the way that she explained it because she said that interconnected healing is healing through the oneness that we recognize in our stories and those of others, regardless of our background. And I found that to be so powerful because I certainly have seen that in my own journey, where through the stories of others and through my own story, I have managed to tap into the healing that was available through the stories of others. I know that you will love Andrea as much as I do because she is wise beyond her years, and I think we can learn so much from each other's experiences, including that of Andrea. Some fun facts that I'd like to share with you is that she is a language enthusiast, a meditation and journaling practitioner, a writer, yes, a fellow writer, and a colossal rap fanatic. As always, I want to thank all of my listeners for listening to my podcast and for joining me on this journey. I appreciate it so much. Comment on my post on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of the episode. I really would love your feedback. As always, stay tuned and keep listening. Hi, Andrea. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
That's awesome. Why don't you kick us off and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I am 21 years old. I'm going to be turning 22 actually in a few days. So I'm very excited about that. I just graduated from college, so now I'm kind of figuring things out, but I did end up starting a book project while I was in my last year of undergrad. And I'm getting done with that in the next couple of months. And I'm very excited about this project because it changed my major completely. I was originally a literature and international relations major, and now I'm delving more into psychology and counseling. And, this project that I worked in, interviewing people and just getting to know people of all backgrounds, has really started that passion in me to go into psychology or a field like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you change your major at all?
Yeah, I graduated with my original major, which was the IR and literature. But, now I'm planning to do a graduate program in something related to psychology and counseling.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Congratulations.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful
thank you.
accomplishment. You're very welcome. Today, we're going to talk about your book, but let's start with your experience.
Yeah, of course. I'll be happy to. And I always find it like super therapeutic when I talk to other people about kind of my experience. And this is kind of what I ended up doing for my book. But without getting into that and talking about like myself, I grew up with a parent, like my dad. He was what some people would call a narcissistic parent, or someone that just, is always looking out for themselves and doesn't really take in mind the feelings, the emotions of those around them. And, that was very much the environment for me growing up. It was, as we spoke before, it was kind of like a walking on eggshells type of dynamic where, it was a constant fear of saying something that would upset my father, or, that would get him to lash out in anger. And whenever those instances did arise, it was fear, like it was just palpable fear. And I could remember, like, from the top of my mind, the instance where he was screaming and my mom was in the room, my brother was in the room as well. And, he started screaming at my mom, and my mom was just quiet the entire time. She didn't want to, respond to not escalate the anger. And my brother had a pair of scissors next to him when he was like pretending that he wasn't really listening to what was happening. But I could see that he was looking at the pair of scissors the entire time. I just made like tie those two things together, and I knew that he wanted to do something to my dad in that moment. And my mom noticed it too. And instances like that I had kind of blocked out of my mind for a while. Like I think our brains have this way of protecting us from traumatic experiences, and they sort of make us forget them and or make them cloudy memories that we have a hard time pinpointing. But, those kind of flashes of memories like that, I get every now and then. And it was definitely a difficult environment in that sense.
So tell me, when did this start? Was it something that was always there? You always knew him like that? Or was there a particular event that triggered this behavior?
No, I always knew him like that. It's sad because I don't have very good memories. Like perhaps there were good memories because my mom tells me that we've had conversations about this, and she says, do you remember those times when you were little? Like I lived in Mexico for a while, until I was 3, and then I came back when I was 8. And there were instances where, my dad would uh the one show of affection was he would give me like a massage, like he would massage my shoulders. And it would be funny for him because he would do like a little karate move where he would do karate on my shoulders, and that was kind of his show of affection. And my mom would tell me, do you remember that? And I kind of do, but I kind of remember it through her because I feel like those memories, unfortunately, also I don't really hold anymore. But if there was an instance that started it, I don't think there was. I think it was just his way of being was always very detached, very cold, very like he was always in his own world. Like I could tell. I think my mom tells me the story that when I was little, it's kind of funny. She told me that my dad bought a new car, and we came to the United States, and buying a new car was very, very huge for us because we were coming from this country that was very poor. And my dad was very excited about the new car, and he would like be there pretty much every day, just cleaning the car, just doing things with his car. And then my mom was telling me that one day we were sitting outside, and I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I was looking at my dad cleaning his car, and I looked over at my mom and I told her, I was like, Mom, I think that if like the house were to burn down someday and my dad were to choose to save us or the car, he would save the car, right? And my mom just looked at me like she told me, she's like, I can't believe you had that thought at 4 years old. But it was kind of
Very
that
intuitive.
feeling that yeah, that feeling that, he was very concerned with other things outside of, his family. But yeah, there wasn't a specific event that I could recall.
Okay. Did he ever get physical with your mom or your brothers or yourself?
No, my mom told me that before we were born, he did get physical, and, she did think about leaving him. But she actually did. She went to her parents' house, and, she thought about separating. But he came to the house and he asked for forgiveness, and he promised to change. And she tells me now that people that show those kinds of aggressive tendencies, it's very difficult for them to really make that change unless they commit to it and are very purposeful about it. And I guess my dad wasn't he I don't think he hit her after that, but at times I feel like, I don't know, they're both very difficult, verbal and physical abuse. But when I see the kind of damage that the verbal abuse has done to my mom for over 15 years, I don't know what's worse, because sometimes I see her and I see that she doesn't see herself as other people do. She thinks her worth is very low. And that's just heartbreaking because it's something that, it's like eating up at her inside. And, it's very hard for her to share kind of like what she felt when she was being screamed at and told she was worthless and told she would end up failing in everything she did in life. And I think the voice of my dad is like ringing in the back of her mind constantly. And for me, that's just it's just a different type of, hurt. And no, he never, I mean, he like, like parents, when they would like scold a child, they would like hit them with like in our culture, like I'm Hispanic, and there's this joke that runs around that parents are more prone to disciplining by like physical disciplining. And, he would do that to my brothers growing up, like hit them with a belt or, stuff like that. But as like whenever he would lash out in anger, he would only just I mean, only to say the least, right? But it was very painful. He would scream, and it was just very, very hard to get any word in. It was just like, and he would do this in public too. I didn't, mention that.
Gosh.
He did it at a gasoline station once, and a man came up to him, and the man was like, his fists were balled up. He was ready to hit my dad. And my mom saw that, and she got us into the car and she drove away. My dad was still screaming at her, and she was driving down the road. No, he was just never afraid of what anyone thought, would they would say about his way of being in public. And that was very frightening, because I thought, if he doesn't care, what can stop him from ever escalating the verbal abuse into any physical abuse?
Yes. Are your mom and your dad still together?
They're not. They separated when I was 14, about 7 years ago. They separated, and my dad went to live in Mexico, and we haven't heard from him since. That is the most ironic thing, because, Marlene, when I tell you that we were constantly waiting for that separation, we were anticipating it we were just knowing that when that happened, it was going to change everything. And one day, he just decided to do it by himself, because it was, my mom says that he kind of felt the animosity in the house. Like at one stage, I think there was a turning point where, for me, I kind of made it very clear that I was not comfortable around him. Like I would, whenever he would make a joke, or whenever he would try to be like lighten the mood after saying something very hurtful, I would just disregard whatever he said, or I would, not pay any attention to it. And I think that got to him over time, from my brothers as well. And, one day he came up to us, and I was there, and my mom was like trying to gather money to pay rent, because she always did that with him. And, that day he came and he said, I'm leaving in a couple of days. Here is some money that Social Security was telling me that, Andrea is supposed to receive, because she's going to be 18 soon, and, it's her right to get it. He's like, this is going to help you out, the 4 years that you have until you turn 18. And yeah, he just said, here are some dates where you could go to the bank and get the money. And I'm going to Mexico. And, I already have a job, I think he had there planned. And yeah, he just left like that. And it was kind of surreal, because it was after all of those years of expecting it, he was the one that made the decision to leave.
Yeah. How did
Mm-hmm.
that make you feel? The abuser
Mm.
in the home just walking out. Almost like,
Yeah.
wasn't there retribution? Didn't you have to pay for what it is that you've done to us? How do you get to just
Mm.
choose to walk away? How did that make you feel?
Yeah, if I'm honest, and I say this a lot to my mom too, I'm like, I tell her that we moved on too quickly from him leaving. We didn't really stop to think about how that made us feel, like as a family we did. We were so desperate to just be able to have lightness in the house, and to be able to feel like we could say whatever we wanted, to feel like we could do whatever we wanted, and just be happy, just genuinely laughing, and not being afraid that he was going to say something hurtful, that we didn't stop to think it's kind of ridiculous that he's leaving without any kind of, thing to pay for what he did. And he could just walk away and start a new life and be free of responsibility. It's ridiculous, but that hits you after you enjoy the liberty that you've never had, for so many years. And when it does hit you, that's when I started feeling confused and depressed. And I thought, it doesn't make sense that after all those years, I'm the one that's carrying the aftermath of what happened, and he could just walk away freely from it. And I don't even know if what he did affects him, honestly. I don't know if he thinks about it, if he feels remorse. And it's a hard thing to navigate, because a lot of things that I do are born from a lot of the things that I went through with him, like my way of seeing relationships, my way of seeing myself, of seeing commitment. All of that is just, it's affected by those years. And after, like, I really had to come terms with the fact that there were 14 years of my life. And I mean, I'm just 21. So it was more than half of my life. So it has to affect me in some way. And, I really had to understand that in order to not blame myself for mistakes that I kept making.
Yes. And
Mhm.
once you started to feel depressed and this was weighing down on you, how did you get through the experience?
I think I didn't really feel the weight of it until I actually had a relationship that ended up really triggering that kind of abandonment wound, or as they might call it, a wound. I ended up dating this person, and actually the last time I saw them, because they ended up leaving unexpectedly, was we were having dinner, and he actually opened up about having a difficult relationship with his father. And then he was just telling me that, because I had touched upon this briefly before, what I had gone through with my dad. Didn't really go in depth, but it was just touching upon it. And he said, I still live with my father, and he is very detached from our family. It's just a lot of mirroring between my story and his. And he said, I never want to be like him. I want to stray away from that. And then next thing you know, that was the last time I heard about him. And, he just completely vanished. And at that moment, I was like, I thought something was wrong with me. I was like, is there something that I'm missing? Or, am I just not fitting the mold of how someone should be to be in a relationship that lasts? Because for me, it was just a lot of working up to opening up to somebody. So when I finally did, it was just getting that response was very painful. And also just leading up to that, I had gone through some things in university where I was in this school that was very elite, like an elite college, and I had to really live up to the expectations of professors and just the curriculum. And I had made academic mistakes that made me question my self-worth. And all of that was just boiling to the surface. And then COVID happened, and I had to come back home. And then when I was home, I was still remembering a lot of the things I had gone through when I was at university. And then the person, the guy that I talked about, he called me, and then he said, I apologize. Like, it was all on my end. Like, I was struggling with a family member that passed away. And, all of those things were just in my mind. And then I went through this period of feeling very disillusioned with the way things were going. I thought, how am I ever going to work through the things that I had gone through for those years and understand the way that they affected me, because I didn't fully understand it. And I was just very depressed. I started, drinking, which really hadn't done before, as a way of forgetting things and just, being outside of my head for a moment. I started doing that. It was just a matter of waking up very late every day. I would wake up like pretty much by noon. I try to get through the day as quickly as possible. And yeah, how I got out of it, there was a point where I relied a lot on my faith. I once heard someone say, if you were able to see yourself the way God sees you, you would completely change your perspective about yourself. And when I heard that person say that, I just started crying. Like one night, I was remembering that, and I was hearing this song, and I just asked God to show me a way to get back to myself, to get back to who I knew I could be, and to help me see myself through his eyes. And I knew that I had to do something on my end, because I knew that I could surrender to God, but I also had to change the habits that I was acquiring. So one day I just drastically changed my routine. There's this thing where people say, if you change your physical reality, like the way that you do things, your mental state will alter sooner or later. And what I did was I started waking up super early. I wanted to get up before others in my house, because sometimes the interactions I had would be very tense, like coming back from university and just, being with everyone in the home during COVID. People weren't working. It was a lot of tension sometimes in the house, with us having, different lives and now coming together. And I would wake up early. I would just kind of be meditating. Like, I didn't really know how to meditate, but I would listen to like music and just be with my thoughts for a moment, and I would read. Perhaps that was the biggest thing that helped me. I read a lot of memoirs, and people in these memoirs would talk about their experiences, and hearing them talk about them and, see myself mirrored in what they went through. And sometimes, even if I didn't see myself, I would just be mesmerized by the way that someone could get out of a situation through their own unique way of viewing their life and their circumstances. I would do that. I would listen to
Oh,
motivational videos, and just gratitude was another thing that really helped me. I think gratitude is so powerful, the way that you can shift your perspective through viewing the things that you really have that are just helpful to you in this moment. And I journaled a lot. Journaling is very powerful for me too. And I always talk to people about it. I'm like, you should keep a journal. Even if you don't know that, if you feel like I'm not a writer, or, I can't sit down with my thoughts and, write something, because it's just in my head and I can't put it on paper. I just tell them to go ahead and try it either way, because it's a way to work through a lot of the things that you can't work through when you just have them in your mind and you don't really put them in a visible way. So when I did that, it was just very transformational. And I look at my journaling entries nowadays. Like the other day, I was reading them, and it's so cool to see the progression of your mindset, because you don't view it when you're living it. You
yeah.
think, I'm still in the same spot I was in months ago. But then when you
Yes.
read it, you're like, oh, wow, I've actually changed. And yeah, it was that. And then my book was like the final straw, kind of, that ended up pulling things together for me. And it was mainly through meeting, so many amazing people that are strangers, really, because I met them, through this book project. But there's this whole concept like interconnected healing, and
Yes.
it happened, yeah, through the stories of these people.
So you are writing this book, and that's very exciting. You have this concept of interconnected healing that you present in your book. Tell us a bit about that. How does that
Yeah,
work?
yeah, it works through a shared story. I usually, that's kind of the caption that I have for it, also on my Instagram and my website. But when you share a story and it's authentically, like kind of what you do in this podcast, you have people come and share their story, and it's authentic to who they are when they reach a place of really coming to understand the events that led up to them being able to feel like they're living authentically in their life. And, in this book, I interview 22 strangers that I met during the time period that I told you I was working through this depression and just understanding who I was. And they came at a time where it was just me trying to see that the things that I was going through were not only going for my life, but other people had experienced them too, and they had gone through them, and they had figured out tools and lessons that really carried them to a place of feeling secure in who they were. And, this interconnected healing happens through being open, first of all, and being compassionate to hear somebody else's story, and really being able to draw, and you have kind of the open-mindedness to draw insights from things that might not resonate directly with your story. I spoke to a lot of people that were, going through terminal illnesses. They were going through marriage tensions, things that I haven't experienced yet. But the little insights that I took from them were that they always came back to themselves, understanding who they were, and really just taking the time to check in with themselves and, journal, or just meditate, or do whatever that brought them mindfulness, was always at the center of all of these things that, I might have not related to directly. And when I really was open minded to see that, I started just being energized in my life by the way that they live their own life. And I was telling one of the women that I spoke to, Rochelle, she ended up telling me this mantra that she had, where every day she would just, ask the universe, ask God, just for this day, allow me to really live this day to the fullest of, my capacity, and just be able to experience it as you mean for me to experience it. And, just for this day, she would say, she's not looking at tomorrow, she's not looking at yesterday. And, that for me, when we were talking, I told her, Rochelle, you literally said something that I have in a sticky note right in front of me in my desk. It's a verse from the Bible, and it says, it's from Marx, and it's saying, allow me to live today as you meant for me to live it. And it was just speaking to that. And one day when I was brushing my teeth, I was thinking, I'm still so behind on understanding my trauma and understanding the way that my dad's abuse affected me. And I just felt down about that. And then I remembered my conversation with Rochelle, and I was like, no, this is just one day. And I was able to get through it, and I was able to still be mindful of my life and what I've been through. And that's an accomplishment. A lot of people think it's not, but it really is. So, kind of those little things that I grabbed from other people just make me who I am. And I kind of, change them, and they shift over time because we all grow and we change. But it's crazy how a lot of people don't realize, the interconnectedness between human beings, and how we really are so similar at the core. And that's why you could have a conversation with a stranger and feel like you've known them for a really long time. And this book is about that. There's 3 parts, and the first part is kind of me understanding my journey, and there's this concept of narrative therapy. Dr. Andrea Pennington, I actually really recommend, your listeners to check out some of her work. It talks about this concept of retelling your own story to yourself to clear the misconceptions that you've told over time. And this can look anything like, she gives this example of people may think, well, the women in my family have always had bad luck with marriages, or they've always, ended up in relationships that are hurtful. So I'm going to be the same way, like kind of like analyzing those things and really changing them to fit who you are and not who your generational patterns are. So she talks about this concept of narrative therapy. And the first part of my book is about that, and me retelling things that I've identified for forming my identity and shifted them to really fit how authentically I feel, and not in the light of my family, not in the light of my school, of my work, just with who I feel I am. And then the second part is, these wonderful people that I met through my book that I interviewed, and how their stories complemented this journey of retelling my narrative. And then the third part of the book is just about service, and how once you understand yourself and you see yourself mirrored in other people, and how you see you're not that different from them, service is born in a very natural way. I feel people sometimes believe that service needs to look like a profession, like a doctor, like, a counselor. But, it can look like a conversation, like what we are having right now. And when you have those 2 parts of being grounded in yourself and having compassion, service can be born in very unexpected ways. And we need a lot of service in this world, because people need to be able to listen to different mindsets and understand the value in their own through having people be open to share their authenticity. And everyone has a story to share. When I came up with the news that I was writing a book to my close friends and family, I came up with a lot of people that said, I've always wanted to write a book, but I'm too old now. Or like, my story is not relevant anymore. I told them, what do you mean by that? If I were able to read stories of people that feel their narratives aren't relevant or aren't important, I know that I would get so much out of them, because there are so many untold narratives in the world that are rich, that are enhancing of who we are. And you're never too old, never too anything to share who you are authentically. I really hope people understand that, the value of their story, through this book that I'm writing.
Thank you so much for this very comprehensive overview, Andrea. I love this concept of interconnected healing, and I can't wait for your book. Now, I know that you have actually experienced this interconnected healing yourself through one of your interviews. Do you want to share a bit more about that with us?
Yeah. Yeah, I spoke to Drew, and our conversation was the only one that actually had me shedding tears during our first encounter. And it was because Drew cried in the interview and I wasn't expecting her to. But she shared a story of, abuse by her father. And, when she mentioned her father, I just, something inside of me shifted and I knew that it was about to be, something different from the other conversations. And she experienced both physical and verbal abuse growing up. And what made her cry was she was talking about how her abuse actually made her have a mental illness. She told me, with tears in her eyes, Andrea, it shocks me to know that had I not been physically abused by my father, I wouldn't have bipolar 2 disorder and I would be healthy today and I would be able to have, relationships that aren't, sometimes strained by this illness. And when she said that, I just wanted to hug her and I wanted to be there because I don't have, a mental illness that was born from, my father's abuse, but we were talking about so many things that we share, habits that we were feeling very guilty of growing up. For her, very similar to me, it was using men in relationships. For her, it was, different. For me, it was for validation. For Drew, it was more so like, just feeling in control of whatever she was doing through being in relationship with men. And, when I heard her say that and I told her, Drew, I have the same thing, I don't know why I'm like this. Like I know that I can be happy alone, but I'm constantly searching for it in another person. She told me, she's like, Andrea, that's so normal. Like, that is something that people that have undergone abuse do. And I told her, even when you say abuse, sometimes I think it's a stretch. I don't know, the word just holds such a heavy connotation that when I use it for myself, I feel like it doesn't apply because it, nothing physical happened and there's no proof of it. It's only whatever I lived and whatever I was told and I've internalized. So sometimes I don't use it for myself. But when
Yeah.
she said it so naturally, that it applies to me, I was like, you're right. I was abused growing up and it is something that I end up, internalizing and it reflects in a lot of the things that I do. And just that conversation for me, I kept in my book, in her chapter, a lot of the dialogue. I kept it pretty much like raw as it was during the interview. And I just wanted people to see me working through my own kind of trauma and understanding of my trauma, literally as we were going along with our conversation. It was like a therapy session, really just talking to someone that had gone through this a similar experience. And like at the time I wasn't really able to pay for therapy. So I tell people all the time that writing the book was my therapy and meeting these people were my therapy because I started therapy, but I had to pay out of pocket and it ended up becoming too expensive. And I was tempted to feel discouraged by that. And, I started thinking, like, well, what's the point if I can't even get the resources I need to get better? But at the end of the day, you know yourself better than your therapist, better than anyone can ever know your story. And there are roadblocks, obviously you struggle to see your experiences sometimes as you should see them, very holistically and you focus on one thing or you like fixate on something for a really long period of time and you're unable to move past it. And you think, well, what's ahead? Like if I don't get help, what can I do? But when you hold the intention to do something for yourself, I want to share with your listeners this girl that I saw on YouTube. She shared something that to this day keeps me going whenever I think there is nothing more to do or I don't know what to do to be able to continue working through these trauma and just circumstances. She shared that one day she was kind of sitting with herself and she ended up thinking like, why do I keep getting in abusive relationships or in patterns of, being with others that are just very hurtful to me? She said, I don't understand why I'm doing this. And she had this realization, this epiphany where she looked in the mirror and, she thought, I've been doing so much for others for all of my life. This is my turn. She said, this is your turn. And from now on, everything I do is for you because I've been pretty much neglecting you for my entire existence. And when she made that mental shift, she didn't know how the heck she was going to get out of her circumstance, and, if she was going to go to a therapist or, look at motivational videos like I did on YouTube. But she knew that it was going to be for her, and that shift is powerful, and it leads to things like my opportunity to write the book and to meet people came out of the blue. Like, I was not planning to start writing it my last year of undergrad. Frankly, I was very busy. I was writing thesis too. And when it came, I just had this nudge, like this feeling in me, like this is something that I'm meant to do at this moment. And then, it takes a little bit stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
Most things do take that, because I was like an introvert. I was like speaking to people in the middle of a pandemic through Zoom. It was kind of like I didn't know what to expect, but I did it, and it's been so rewarding. So it does take a little bit of stepping out of your comfort zone for sure.
Yeah. What I like about your story is that you made this change and you didn't need a lot of money to do this.
Mm-mm.
So, for the listeners who are thinking, look, I can't afford a therapist, a psychologist, and all of these things that I have to pay for. And I mean, granted, there are services that you can get from the government that are free, but you can also find it within your space, right? Like you use the
Mhm.
motivational videos, you use journaling as a tool, writing of your book. These were all therapeutic and helped you. The interviewing sessions with people, speaking to others that have gone through traumatic experiences and sharing their healing path with you. And so that for
Mhm.
me is grabbing, because that means that healing is available to everyone. And if there were ever some barrier that we thought there were, it's a myth.
Yeah. Yeah, we are our best healers. And, I think society sometimes, and I don't want to say society is entirely antagonistic, but sometimes they make it out to seem that, you know, salvation or just healing from circumstances is external, and we have to search for it externally, through, therapists, through, support groups. And these are amazing tools. Like, I'm not saying that they're not useful, because the therapy sessions I had were amazing. Like, it made me feel like I wasn't, abnormal, or the way that I process things wasn't odd, because I brought it
Yeah.
up to my therapist and she said, "Oh, that's very, very normal."
Yes.
But at the end of the day, we are our best healers because we know our circumstance better than anyone else. And I think it also takes a lot of self-compassion, though. I will say that, because when you start going about things by yourself, it takes a lot of knowing that there's going to be trial and error. There's going to be many moments of doubt where you think, is this even worth it? Is it even worth it to wake up this early, to journal for the fifth time today about something that I still can't work through? You will go through those moments. It's very normal. But, everything in life is kind of a trial and error, to be honest. And, healing and really getting to a point of knowing what works for you, it's just a matter of setting that intention and continuing to hold a space for yourself and compassion for yourself and showing up every day. And if you can't show up one day, know that it's completely normal. I went through many days where I thought, am I just reverting back to how I used to be? And, what about the progress that I thought I made? And that progress is still there. You might not feel it, but when you do the next thing, you start feeling little, like, inklings of that change. And it's beautiful to see in a long-term time frame too. I sometimes look back and it makes me smile, because I think I would have never be having this conversation with you a year ago. I would have been working through a lot of things and confused about many, immobilized by the things I'd been through. And now I am trying to help other people. And for me, that's just, even saying it out loud, it's like crazy, because, it's, you see that progress, and just be mindful of it. Don't wait for other people to tell you, oh, you are changing, or you are becoming more into your authentic self. Know that you are, and you are the person that knows yourself best. I really
Yeah.
can't say that for everyone.
Yeah. And a great point that you're making is that healing is not linear. It's not a linear process. There will be
Yeah.
ups and there will be downs. And I like to say that when we are in the eye of the storm, in that place of confusion that you are describing, it's very difficult to see out. And we have constant afflictions that we have to deal with. So we have afflictions and we heal, and we have afflictions and we heal. But when we move out of the eye of the storm, like after your father left, and we sit with our emotions, we don't
Hmm.
have any of the afflictions, but only healing. But the healing is just as difficult and challenging as being in the eye of the storm, simply without the inflictions.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You said it so well. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And another thing I will say, um, what you said about the point of linearity is very important. But also another thing I learned recently is that it's never ending. It's literally healing is never
That's
ending.
true.
And I always had this mindset where I was like, is this year the year where I'm finally gonna feel liberated and it's gonna stop affecting me? No, it's not going to be like, it's not a deadline where you reach this point and all of a sudden it stops affecting you. It really is something that you're constantly phoenixing. Phoenixes, they rise from the ashes and they reinvent themselves. You're constantly reinventing yourself, and that's just beautiful. Like, if you really think about it, would you prefer to just reach a finish line or continue to reach different finish lines that are just constantly getting better and better? And even if they're not, even if you do reach a slump and you feel disillusioned, knowing that there is something to hope for, that there is a new version, there are always new versions of yourself waiting to be birthed. And having the intention to birth them is powerful. So, so powerful.
Yeah. That was exactly my
Mhm.
thought. That these finishing lines that you're talking about, they are new versions of yourself, and they can be very
Mhm.
uncomfortable when you're in that healing phase,
Yes.
because you don't recognize that person. You don't recognize that person in yourself, but it's beautiful when you go through it, through that transformation, and to come into your own and come out the other side, and then just progress to the next part. It's
Mhm.
absolutely incredible.
It is so beautiful. And, one thing I've had to learn is that a lot of people or just patterns might fall away in those transformations. And, something that happened to me when I was healing was that I had close friendships that actually ended up fading away because I think, like you said, you cannot recognize the old version of yourself. I feel like perhaps those friendships didn't really recognize the person I was trying to become, that I felt more authentically was who I wanted to be. And I really have to tell this to myself now too. It is normal for those things to happen. And, people are constantly gravitating towards those things that they now really speak to their soul and speak to the reality that they're trying to create for themselves. And it's normal for these connections to fall away. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, that you're doing something to upset the other person or to upset family, even if it is family that's falling away. It's a growth process and it's normal. And I speak about this in my book as well. Through seeing like those people fall away, I was able to gain a lot of new people that came into my life. I actually became very close friends with two of the women I spoke to in my book, and just they speak to the new you, really, to the new person that you are trying to become. And that's beautiful, the way the universe does that and brings in new voices, takes away some, and it's a growth process, and it's very transformational in that sense.
Yeah. And it's very
Mhm.
supportive for where you are. If you think about that
Mhm.
transformation, you wouldn't be able to smoothly transition if it wasn't for the new voices that came in to support that.
Mhm.
And so it's necessary, and it's a part of the journey to have those people fall away. I agree with
Yeah.
you, because we don't
Mhm.
realize that some of the people that we have in our lives, they tell us a certain narrative that we believe.
Yes.
And when God shows you through your circumstances, these are not people that you need in your life, and they slowly start to fade away because they have no more connection with the new version of you.
Hmm.
It's liberating, and I think we should
It
embrace
is.
that rather than to be sad about having lost, because I think, sometimes we view it maybe as a loss, but it's such a gain.
Mhm. You said it so beautifully. Yeah, it is such a gain, and it's a shift in perspective. And you can get down about it. And I'm not gonna lie, I was down about it for a while, and it is lonely too. I don't know for you, the healing journey, or just starting to heal and starting to really look within. For me, it was very lonely. At times, I would journal and I would say, what's the point of losing all of these friendships? I feel like I don't have anyone to speak to about what I'm going through. And I would just have just these resources that I was using to be able to get out of the slump I was in, but I didn't have anybody. Like I had a close friend, but I didn't feel like I talked to her about what was going on. It was just something very personal, and it is discouraging. Like there is no sugarcoating the fact that it was discouraging, but it is kind of a discomfort that you have to feel for a second in order to know that there is something that's gonna come out of it, because usually discomforts like that you intentionally bring upon yourself to really reflect, they usually do bring about a transformation or just some form of breakthrough in the long term.
Yeah. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just on that, it's important to feel that
Mm-hmm.
discomfort. Get angry if you have to get angry. Feel lonely, but get through it, move through it. Because,
Yes.
in my experience, if we don't sit in, and I like to use this, I say, if we don't sit in our misery, right? If we don't sit in that
Yeah.
discomfort and we don't feel it, it will piggyback on the emotions the moment you are triggered at a different stage in your life. And it will feel so overwhelming because it would be the circumstances that you're in, plus the unprocessed emotions or portion of the emotions that you did not process previously, that will piggyback the one on the other. And it will be very overwhelming. And so, on this healing journey, it's so important to make sure that you feel the pain, lean into that pain, sit in your misery, feel the discomfort, and process it, and then leave it behind. You know, and that
Mm-hmm.
for me is the beauty and the liberation that healing brings. And it's the
Yeah.
best thing that, you can look back and say, okay, today I'm not triggered by this anymore. And that's when you know
Mm-hmm.
you've dealt with it. There's no disturbance
Mm-hmm.
on your spiritual heart. It makes me think of the book The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. It's one of my favorite books.
Oh yeah.
He speaks about the gentleman who's driving the vehicle on the motorway, and he sees all the cars and the trees coming past him. But then he sees a blue Mustang, and he was on his way to have a
Mm-hmm.
picnic with his family. But immediately he saw the Mustang and he thought about his ex-girlfriend 5 years ago. And he thought, was that her? And who was that driving the car? Was that the new boyfriend that she had? And he started feeling upset, and he was so disturbed by what he had seen. And all he had seen was a blue Mustang. But he didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
go for the picnic with his family anymore. His mood immediately changed. Everything about the wonderful day was now gone. And it was about not allowing for that stuck energy within yourself, those emotions to be processed and to be let go, because they
Right.
will always come back and find you. And the moment there's something that triggers them, you'll feel the disturbance on your spiritual heart. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a very cool example. And also another book from Singer, The Surrender Experiment. I would really recommend, your listeners also check it out. It does talk about that missing piece that once you do go through this journey of healing, there is a part that you really do have to surrender to a greater force, or just, really life itself, to really take you to the finish line, or to whatever multiple finish lines you're going through, because there is only so much that you can do. And the rest, really, life starts, like we were saying, accommodating to the healing you're doing. It's starting to be a reflection of your inner world, your outside reality. And, whether you believe it or not, sometimes these, like we were saying, friendships fall away, new people come in, that's only driven by what you're doing internally. And it's so powerful. And when I talk to people about my book and when I promote it, sometimes I feel like I'm saying something that is like crazy to people. Like I tell them, looking within is probably the most powerful thing you can do for yourself and for your life. And I think people might believe when I say that, like, what is that going to change? What is sitting with my thoughts and looking at my triggers and seeing how they affect me? What is that going to do for my life? It's not going to get me a job. It's not going to get me, whatever people use to measure, success or well-being. But at the end of the day, when you do have this success and material wealth, material gain, your emotions aren't privy to that. They still come up in those circumstances, and everything you do is affected by your internal state. And that's why looking within is so critical. But definitely agree with what you're saying about triggers. I had to check in with myself with triggers that I had with my brothers. Honestly, sometimes we tend to disregard when we go through collective trauma. My family went through the same thing for years. And I, at one point, thought, that the things that I was doing, I was seeing my brothers do it and I was judging them for doing some of the things, like being disconnected, sometimes being rude, or just, tending to focus on themselves a lot. I would judge them about that. And then one day I started thinking, my brothers didn't have a role model, like a male role model. How did that affect them? And it's probably going to be very different from me. And just really having that empathy and sitting with that and recognizing that, your perspective is always going to be different from that of others, even if you did go through something so similar, and it affects you very much at the core. When I shifted that perspective, like anything they did really stopped triggering me as much, because it was just realizing and holding space for their unique experience and going forward from there.
Yeah. The important point that you're making is that, we sometimes are very caught up in our own circumstances that we forget about accommodating also others. And I mean, we spoke about this, touched on this a little bit earlier. And I think you had a different word for it, but we need to be a little bit more selfish in order to heal ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
to bring the empathy inward and to look inwards and to find that seat of self within ourselves. But we should not lose focus on the people around us, like you're saying, because they are also going through their own journeys. And that's a great
Yeah.
perspective to have. And I'm sure it changed some of the things or the mindset that you had in your own healing once you started thinking about your brother's experience
Mm-hmm.
and how it affected them.
Yeah, it definitely did, because it's like, I don't know, I just feel like when it liberates you. It took a weight off my shoulders to not have, when I was affected by, these triggers that I had whenever I would have conversations with my brothers and they would be distant, or they would end up, preferring to be with their partners instead of, going to the movies with me, or something that we used to share before. I would become triggered by it, and it would only affect me, really. At the end of the day, I was just thinking, like, why can't things be as they were before? Like, is there something wrong with me? And it was liberating to hold space for really the things that I didn't know. I never know what they're going through, what they're still processing, because I feel a lot of things are still unprocessed. And just holding space for that, really, for me, was transformational, in the sense that I was no longer weighed down by those triggers. And I would, like, my mood would change. Like, I would actually get really angry when, they would end up disregarding me or something like that. And I would end up going about my day disconnected from whatever I was doing, thinking about that. I would be washing the dishes and I would be like, why do I have to wash the dishes today? And they, can't do it, or things like that, like little things that end up bothering you and they add up. And when I let go of that, it was like I had all of a sudden my life seemed more vibrant. I was able to experience things differently. And it is, like you said, really just giving them that ability to heal, like in a collective sense, but also be selfish at the same time. It is confusing and very complex, but it's just a matter of holding that empathy and that compassion for yourself and for others at the same time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's beautiful. Where can the listeners find you if they want to know more about your book? And when can we expect your book? When will your book be published?
Yeah, you could find me on my website. It's www.authorandreamedina.com. And also, I have an Instagram page where I post about a lot of the things that we've talked about today, topics like these and other topics related to, mental health at Andrea Medina and then the underscore author.
Mhm.
And my book is coming out this December. So it's going to be, published in December. And I'm very excited and just, I don't know, I'm very happy. And it's my first book. So it was definitely, I actually told people that I thought my first book would be a memoir. And I think it became something so much more better, because I have the stories of others that are so beautiful and I really gave them their own space in the book. They complement my own journey, but they deserve their own kind of spotlight because they are transformational. And I'm sure for readers, they speak to all walks of life. I have people from all ages and life experiences, and they touch upon topics like, trauma, like marriage tensions, terminal illnesses. They have losing faith, lack of confidence. I really hope that readers will find themselves reflected in these stories and the main takeaway, value their own story. See that through people, really taking that time to like narrate their stories to themselves again and understand who they are from a different point of view, that they will do the same and they will think that their story is worthy of being told and worthy of them really holding compassion for themselves after having experienced what they have. And yeah, I'm really excited. Thank you.
That is very, very exciting. I am so proud of you, Andrea, for doing the soul work that is required for the healing, for setting that intention and following through with it at such a young age, showing such maturity. It is absolutely refreshing to see. And I can just say,
Thank you so
well done.
much.
And I can wish you well on the rest of your healing journey. And I wish you well with your book launch. It is very exciting. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today. I loved our conversation. And please come back to the podcast once you launch your book in December. I'd love to hear more about it. And I'm sure the
I
listeners will enjoy
will.
it too.
Thank you so much, Marlene. I'm just so happy to be here. And yeah, I would love to be back, if you'd have me. Thank you.
Yes. Take care.
Bye.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode, same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.